Kallum, quite simply, you say this policy is misguided. Explain.
That's right. Just because it's popular with the general public doesn't mean that it's a good economic policy. We always like it when chancellors stimulate, but actually in this instance, it's probably going to do much more harm than good. We have a very serious inflation problem. We don't have a significant lack of demand. In fact, demand is actually running a bit ahead of where we would like it. What we have is major supply problems. And so throwing in a little bit more stimulus may mean that it's a bit easier to pay for things now, but next year it may be even harder than it otherwise would be.
And it's understandable that the government want to help vulnerable households at this time. A number of charities have come forward and said this will make a difference. This means tested £650 amount and then £400 the rest of us, etc. But to what extent is it a sticking plaster that will last this year? And how much is Sunak gambling on the outcome of the conflict, for example, in Ukraine and the lowering of inflation and commodities prices in the long term?
Well, it's a sticking plaster with something very sinister under the surface that will make the underlying wound worse. This is economic illiteracy. What we should be doing now is figuring out actually how to get rid of the inflation as quickly as possible. We are constrained by these very significant supply side issues. There's no doubt about that. But if the UK suffers a multi-year inflation problem, that in the end will be much worse for the least well-off in society, because ultimately it will end with one outcome. The central bank, the Bank of England, forcing a very severe recession upon us until higher unemployment reconditions and recalibrates inflation and inflation expectations. Unfortunately, this seems like a good idea in the near term, but I fear very much that this will make matters much worse for us.
And I'm going to push back a little bit on that one, Kallum, because we've heard plenty of analysis today that given that the stimulus, a lot of it's going to drop in the last 2 quarters of this year, it will actually help the UK narrowly avert a recession. You don't agree with that?
Well, avoiding a recession is not always the best thing that can happen. Recessions, unfortunately, are just part of a normal, healthy economy. If we avoid a recession now, but pay the price of an even bigger recession later on, well, actually, we would be better off having the near-term recession. There are potentially 2 outcomes here. 3, in fact. One is we get a soft landing from all of this. That's what the Bank of England is hoping for. We avoid a recession, inflation rolls over, and we go back to normal business cycle dynamics next year. I actually think if we just stop tinkering with the economy, that would probably happen on its own. But then there are 2 risks. One is a near-term recession, because the Bank of England tightens a bit too much, but gets rid of the inflation, in which case it will be short, it won't be very painful, and we would restart next year. Or we make matters worse for ourselves by stimulating our way through an inflation problem and then requiring an even bigger, deeper recession later on. The output losses associated with the former are much less than if we have to go through that deep recession.